The screen is black, but space is never truly silent. It's a void filled with the hum of engines, the crackle of comms, and the quiet, steady breath of a crew waiting for the impossible. That's where we begin. Not with a bang, but with a breath held too long. My name isn't important. The man I was before this, the engineer, the diplomat, the fool who thought reason could trump pride, that man is gone. What's left is the commander of this rust bucket listening post, the ghost of Kepler, hanging in the dark like a forgotten ear. They gave us this post as a punishment, a joke. The galaxy's least wanted, stationed at the universe's back door. But tonight the joke's about to end. And it's going to end in fire. It all started with a simple, ugly truth we tried to share. Humanity's great gift to the cosmos wasn't poetry or art, or even our strangely resilient biology. It was a lesson in physics. A brutal, elegant, and terrifyingly simple equation we called the railgun. While the galactics danced with plasma shields and shimmering energy weapons that looked pretty in a vacuum, we looked at a simple problem. How do you punch a hole through anything from a very, very long way away, without wasting a single joule of energy on fancy light shows? The answer was a slug of tungsten, accelerated to a fraction of light speed by a magnetic track. No fancy plasma, no complex containment fields. Just kinetic energy. The universe's oldest, most reliable killer. We were proud of it. We were naive. When we were welcomed into the Galactic Accord, we came with open hands and a warning. We stood before the Celestial Synod, a whirl of tentacles, shimmering scales, and eyes that held the light of ancient stars. We showed them the schematics. We explained the math. We told them, in plain translated terms, that their cherished energy shields, which diffused heat and dispersed plasma, would be useless. A shield designed to stop a boiling kettle can't stop a bullet. The tungsten projectile would pass through like a stone through mist. They didn't get angry. They didn't get fearful. They chuckled. It was a soft, patronizing sound that filtered through the translators. The Ixian ambassador, a creature of crystalline beauty, pulsed with gentle light. A charmingly primitive concept. It vibrated. But projectile weapons? We abandoned such crude kinetic force millennia ago. The energy expenditure for such negligible results. It is not elegant. Elegant. That was the word that doomed them. They were a civilization obsessed with elegance, with ceremony, with the appearance of power. Our railgun was ugly. It was direct. It was human. We tried. Stars how we tried. But our warnings were filed under quaint human quirks. We became the butt of jokes in the grand halls. Don't make the humans angry, they tease, they might throw a rock at you. We were silent after that. What else was there to say? You can't warn someone about a cliff if they insist on wearing a blindfold and calling you a coward for stopping. The silence was the worst part. The folly wasn't theirs alone. Our own government, desperate for acceptance, ordered us to stop. Do not antagonize our new allies, the directive came. Let them believe what they wish. Our security is not their concern. So we fell silent. We built our defenses in secret, hidden in asteroid belts and painted black against the void. We watched. And we waited. Because in the silence you can hear everything. That's how we heard the first whispers of the Armada. The Cathar hegemony. A warrior species that valued elegance only in the perfection of their conquests. They had crushed 3 Accord systems before the Synod even managed to form a response. And their response was, of course, elegant. The Grand Armada of the Accord. 1,000 ships, their hulls gleaming with captured starlight, their shields a kaleidoscope of overlapping energy fields that made space itself shimmer. It was the most beautiful fleet ever assembled. A parade of power meant to awe the Cathar into surrender. From my chair on the Ghost of Kepler, I watched the tactical feats. My second in command, a woman with eyes that had seen too many bad calls, stood behind me. Her hand was on my shoulder, her grip tight. They're forming up in the Deneb system, she whispered, her voice rough. They're going to meet them head-on. On the main viewer, the Accord fleet was a breathtaking sight. It was everything the Synod believed in. Power as performance. On a separate screen, a simple, cold schematic showed the Cathar fleet. Blocky, utilitarian, and surrounded by a strange, passive sensor distortion we couldn't quite identify. It didn't look like any shield we knew. They're not even trying to hide their approach, my second said. It's arrogant. No, I replied, my throat dry. It's confident. They've seen the Accord's technology. They're not afraid of it. The comms channel from the Accord flagship, the luminous dawn, flooded our quiet post. It was the voice of the Admiral, a Silene with a voice like chiming bells, full of unwavering certainty. Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge the peace of the Accord. Witness the strength of our unity. Witness the light that banishes the darkness. I wanted to scream. I wanted to open a channel and beg them to scatter, to use evasive patterns, to do anything but present a perfect static target. But the order was clear. Silence. The folly of our silence was a weight crushing my chest. The two fleets entered visual range. The luminous dawn fired the first shot, a brilliant lance of green plasma that streaked across the void. It was a magnificent sight. It was also, as we knew it would be, completely ineffective. It splashed harmlessly against the Cthar shields, which glowed a dull red for a moment before returning to normal. A ripple of what we assumed was confidence went through the Accord fleet. They held formation. And then the Cthar responded. There was no brilliant beam of light. No flashy explosion. From the lead Cthar dreadnought, there was only a brief, almost imperceptible flicker along its hull. A microsecond later, the luminous dawn simply came apart. It wasn't an explosion. It was a disintegration. A perfect, round hole 20 meters wide punched clean through its core from bow to stern. The surrounding metal glowed white-hot for an instant before the entire ship ruptured into a silent, expanding cloud of debris. The comms went insane. Panic, screams, orders shouted over each other. The Accord fleet began to break formation, but it was too late. The Cthar ships began to flicker, one after another, like a deadly, silent strobe light. And with every flicker, an Accord ship died. They were being methodically, ruthlessly dismantled. The greatest fleet in the galaxy was being turned into scrap by a weapon they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't stop. My second's hand tightened on my shoulder until it hurt. We watched, helpless, as the massacre unfolded. The elegant shields did nothing. They were exactly as useless as we said they would be. And then the flickering stopped. The Cthar fleet hung in the silence of the void, surrounded by the glittering dust of 1,000 ships. The entire battle had taken less than 3 minutes. The silence on the bridge of the Ghost of Kepler was heavier than the void outside. We had been right. We had told them. And our reward was a front-row seat to the greatest military disaster in history. Then a new signal cut through the static. A raw, powerful broadcast from the Cthar flagship. Aimed not at us but at every world in the Accord. The voice that came through was guttural, a sound of grinding stone and finality. It spoke only one sentence, a sentence that would echo through every council chamber on every planet from that moment forward. The galaxy has new rulers. The transmission ended. And in the dead quiet that followed, a single automated alert flashed on my console. A proximity warning. A ghost signal we'd been tracking for weeks, one we dismissed as a sensor echo, had just changed course. It was no echo. It was a Cthar scout. And it was heading directly for the one place we never, ever thought they would be interested in. It was heading for Earth. And they now knew that humanity, the quiet, overlooked species that they had just made extinct with a single sentence, was the only one who had seen this coming. The only one who understood their weapon. The only one left who could possibly stand in their way. And they were coming to make sure we never got the chance to speak up again. The alert wasn't a siren. Sirens were for fires, for hull breaches, for things you could understand. This was a single, persistent tone, cold and digital, that cut through the stunned silence on the bridge. It was the sound of a final, terrible truth being confirmed. My second's hand was still on my shoulder, a frozen weight. I could feel the fine tremor in her fingers. We both stared at the tactical plot. The blip representing the Cthar scout was no longer a ghost. It was a solid, angry red dot, and its new trajectory was a line drawn straight from the graveyard of the Deneb system to the heart of our own solar system. To Earth. They know, she whispered, the words barely audible. It wasn't a question. They've always known, I replied, my voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from someone else. They knew we were the only ones who weren't surprised. The only ones who didn't scream. The folly of silence. The phrase echoed in my head, not as a title anymore but as our epitaph. Our governments had chosen silence to avoid panic, to maintain a fragile political peace. But the Cthar understood silence better than anyone. They saw it not as weakness but as calculation. And a calculating enemy is the only kind you need to fear. Get me Central Command, I said, pushing myself out of the chair. My legs felt like water. Encrypted, highest priority. They're not going to listen, my second said, her voice gaining a sharp, desperate edge. She was younger than me, her career still stained with the optimism of the academy. That optimism was dying right in front of me, suffocated by the cold reality on the screen. They didn't listen before Deneb. Why would they listen now? Because now the proof is cooling into scrap metal a few light years away, I snapped, the frustration of years boiling over. Because that scout isn't coming for a friendly chat. It's coming to see what we've got. It's a probe. And if it likes what it sees, the whole damn hegemony will be right behind it. The comms officer, a man who'd spent 20 years listening to the empty whispers of deep space, looked up from his console, his face pale. Sir. Command is acknowledging. They're scrambling the system defense fleet around Mars. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The system defense fleet. A dozen aging cruisers and a handful of patrol boats, designed to handle pirates and smugglers. Their most powerful weapons were particle beams, elegant, precise, and utterly useless against what was coming. They were lining up for the exact same parade ground slaughter we'd just witnessed. Tell them to stand down, I said, my voice low and urgent. Tell them to scatter. Hide in the asteroid belt, use the moons for cover. Anything but a direct engagement. The comms officer relayed the message. The response was almost immediate. A voice, crisp with the authority of someone who'd never seen a ship die, crackled over the speaker. Ghost of Kepler, this is Central. Maintain observation status. Your tactical assessment is noted, but the defense of Earth is our priority. We will meet this threat with a show of force. A show of force. They were using the same words the Accord Admiral had used. I wanted to scream. I slammed my fist on the console, the impact a dull thud in the quiet room. It's not a threat. It's a test. And we're about to fail it. My second moved to the main display, her fingers flying across the screen. She pulled up the old files, the ones we'd been ordered to bury. Schematics of the Mark III railgun platforms we'd secretly built and hidden. Not on warships but on forgotten rocks. Cerberus Station, she said, pointing to a tiny asteroid in the belt. It's operational. It's got a clear firing solution on the Scout's projected path. Cerberus. Our best-kept secret. A railgun so massive it was built into the asteroid itself, its barrel longer than most ships. A weapon designed for one shot, one unimaginably powerful punch. We'd built it as a last-ditch deterrent, a mad scientist's dream that our own military thought was overkill. Now it looked like the only sane thing we'd ever done. Command will never authorize its use, I said, the hopelessness washing over me. They still think this is a negotiation. Then we don't ask for authorization, she said, her eyes meeting mine. There was no rebellion in them, only a fierce, terrible resolve. We have command codes. We can bring it online. Target it ourselves. The air left the bridge. What she was suggesting was mutiny. It was the end of our careers, our freedom, everything. But she was right. Asking for permission was just another form of silence. Another folly. Before I could answer, the long-range scanner beeped again. The Cthar Scout had entered the outer solar system. It wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. And it was emitting a new kind of signal, a powerful, scanning pulse that washed over every planet, every station, every ship. It was taking inventory. On the viewer, we watched the system defense fleet power up their shields, their energy signatures blooming on the sensors like pretty flowers. They were making themselves bright, obvious targets. The perfect show of force. And then, the Scout did something small, something that was more terrifying than any weapon. It adjusted its course by a fraction of a degree. It was no longer aimed at Earth. It was now on a direct path for the heart of the defense fleet near Mars. It had seen this show of force, and it was accepting the invitation. They're going to do it again, my second breathed, her hand going to her mouth. Right here. In our home. I looked from the screen showing the doomed fleet, to the schematics of Cerberus Station. The silent, ugly weapon hidden in the dark. The choice was no longer about rules or careers. It was about which silence would define us. The silence of compliance, of watching another armada die for pride? Or the silence of the hunter, waiting to unleash a truth the galaxy had refused to hear? I reached for the command console, my fingers hovering over the authorization sequence for Cerberus. The codes were there. One command. One chance to break our silence with the only language the Cthar seemed to understand. But as my finger touched the screen, a new priority message flashed from Central Command, marked with the highest level security override. The message was simple, an order that brooked no argument. Ghost of Kepler. Initiate immediate communications blackout. Do not, under any circumstances, reveal our position or capabilities. The political situation is delicate. We are attempting to open a dialogue with the Cthar hegemony. Stand by. Dialogue. They were going to try and talk to them. After everything. The screen went dark, the link to Cerberus Station severed by the override. We were blind. We were mute. And out there in the silent dark, The scout closed in on its unsuspecting prey. The word dialogue hung in the air, more poisonous than any vacuum. It wasn't a command anymore, it was a death sentence. On the main viewer, the Kthar scout continued its relentless advance, a shark smelling blood in the water. Our own defense fleet, those brave, foolish ships, held their formation. I could almost hear the patriotic speeches echoing in their cockpits. My second was no longer just scared. She was furious. Her hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides. "They're going to die for a dialogue?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "They're sacrifices for a conversation that's already over." The comms blackout was total. We were ghosts now, truly living up to our ship's name. We could see everything, but we were utterly mute. Cut off from Cerberus. Cut off from command. All we could do was watch the inevitable play out. The sheer, stupid hubris of our leaders was a physical weight on the bridge. They believed in the power of words against a force that communicated only in annihilation. "They're in range," the sensor officer said, his voice flat, dead. He'd been the one to listen to the luminous dawn as final, panicked transmissions. He knew what was coming. The Kthar scout didn't slow. It didn't hail the fleet. It simply did what it was built to do. That familiar, terrifying flicker along its hull. A microsecond of nothing. Then, the lead cruiser of our defense fleet, the Beijing, simply ceased to be. One moment it was a symbol of human strength, a kilometer of polished steel and determination. The next, it was an expanding cloud of incandescent gas and shrapnel. There was no explosion. Just deletion. Silence. 4-3 heartbeats, there was absolute silence on the enemy's channel. And then chaos. The human fleet broke formation. Panic, real and raw, flooded the comms bands we could still listen to. Ships scrambled, engines flaring as they tried to evade an attack they couldn't see or understand. It was a stampede. The scout flickered again. Another ship, a patrol vessel called the Mumbai, vanished. Then another. It was a hunt. Cold, efficient, and utterly one-sided. This wasn't a battle, it was pest control. "They're not even trying to talk," my second whispered, her anger burnt out, replaced by a hollow horror. "They never were." That's when I made the decision. The only one left. Command had ordered silence to hide our capabilities. But the Kthar already knew. Their scout wasn't here to scan for hidden bases. It was here to prove a point, to demoralize us before the main fleet arrived. Our silence was now the greatest weapon we had left, the silence of a trap. "Override the blackout," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Every head on the bridge turned to me. The comms officer looked like I'd asked him to shoot himself. "Sir. The order, it's a direct contravention." "The men and women dying out there followed direct orders," I said, locking eyes with him. "I'm giving you a new one. Patch me through to Cerberus Station. Bypass command. Use the old maintenance channel, the one they don't know about." It was a risk. A huge one. If command was monitoring, they'd court-martial me before the Kthar could kill us. But the old channel, a relic from the station's construction, was our only hope. It was a whisper in the dark. The officer hesitated for a second longer, then his training kicked in. His fingers flew across the console. "Patching, channel open. You're live to Cerberus control." I leaned into the mic. There was no time for codes or formalities. "Cerberus, this is Ghost Actual. Authorization Delta 0. Wake the dog. I repeat, wake the dog. Target is the Kthar scout. Full power discharge. Fire on my mark." The response was immediate, a voice crackling with equal parts fear and excitement. "Ghost Actual, Cerberus confirms. Delta 0 acknowledged. Powering up the coil. We are live. Awaiting your mark." On the screen the slaughter continued. 2 more ships were gone. The scout was carving a path through the fleet, heading inexorably towards Mars, towards Earth. It was confident. Arrogant. It moved like it owned the space around it. "Sir," my second said, pointing at the sensor readout. "The scout is increasing its scan intensity. It's looking for something. It knows it's being targeted." Of course it did. Powering up a railgun of that magnitude would create a massive energy signature. The kinetic weaponry we had hidden was no longer a secret. The trap was springing itself. The targeting computer finally locked on. A crosshair settled over the blocky, alien shape of the scout. It was millions of kilometers away, but on the scale of the solar system, it was point-blank range. "Cerberus is locked," the voice from the asteroid reported. "We have a solution. The shot is good." This was it. One pull of a trigger, millions of kilometers away. One chunk of tungsten hurled at a fraction of light speed. We would break our silence with the loudest bang humanity had ever created. But just as I opened my mouth to give the order, a new alarm blared. This one was different. Deeper. It was the long-range strategic alert. The sensor officer swiveled in his chair, his face a mask of pure dread. "Sir, new contact. Just emerged from the jump point near Jupiter. It's massive." A new ship blossomed on the tactical plot. It was at least 10 times the size of the Scout. Its design was the same brutal, utilitarian style. This was no probe. This was a warship. The real thing. And it was positioned perfectly. Directly between Cerberus Station and the Scout. If we fired now, the larger ship would take the hit. Our one shot, our only surprise, would be wasted on a shield we couldn't possibly understand. The comms crackled again, but this time it wasn't from Cerberus. It was a powerful, wide-band transmission from the new Cthar warship. The same guttural voice from the Deneb system filled the bridge, but this time the words were in heavily accented, but perfectly understandable English. "Humanity. We have observed your ingenuity. Your silence was noted. Do not waste our curiosity." They were here. And they weren't just here to destroy us. They were here to see what we were made of. My finger hovered over the comms linked to Cerberus. The word "mark" was on my lips. But the giant warship hung in the void, a silent, impossible challenge. Do we fire? Do we reveal our ultimate weapon only to see it fail against a superior shield? Or do we wait and in waiting prove that our warning was just another form of silence? The bridge held its breath. The entire human race was waiting on my next word. The guttural voice from the Cthar warship didn't just fill the bridge, it felt like it was crushing it. "Do not waste our curiosity." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. It wasn't a threat in the way we understood threats. It was colder. It was the voice of a scientist talking to a lab animal that had just done something unexpectedly interesting. My finger was frozen, a centimeter from the comms button that would unleash Cerberus. My mouth was dry as dust. On the main viewer, the massive Cthar warship hung perfectly between our hidden gun and its Scout. It was a shield, yes, but it was more than that. It was a statement. They knew about Cerberus. They had known all along. Our great secret was a joke to them. My second was breathing in short, sharp gasps next to me. "They're playing with us," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They knew we'd try this." The comms linked to Cerberus was still open. I could hear the tense breathing of the crew there, waiting for my order. "Ghost Actual, orders? The coil is at full charge. We can't hold it for long." I couldn't speak. If I fired, we'd waste our one shot. The tungsten slug, the pinnacle of our kinetic weaponry, would strike that warship's shields and probably accomplish nothing. We'd be showing our only card and it would be a dud. The Cthar would see our best effort fail, and then they would have no reason to keep us around. But if I didn't fire, we were admitting defeat. Our silence would become surrender. We'd be confirming their belief that we were just a slightly more clever species waiting to be put down. The choice was impossible. It was a checkmate in a game I never agreed to play. Then the warship did something else. A smaller vessel, a sleek, needle-like craft, detached from its underbelly and began moving. Not towards us. Not towards the remnants of our fleet. It was moving on a slow, deliberate course towards Cerberus Station itself. A new message flashed on my screen, text only, from Central Command. The communications blackout was still technically in place, but someone, somewhere, was panicking enough to break their own rules. Ghost. They are hailing us. They are demanding the schematics for the weapon. They say if we comply they will spare the station. They call it trade. Trade. Our soul for a few more minutes of life. The sheer, arrogant hubris of it was breathtaking. They weren't just destroying us. They were trying to buy our greatest achievement for the price of a delay. My second read the message over my shoulder. "It's a trick," she said, her voice firm now, the fear burned away by a cold fury. "They'll take the schematics and then slag the station anyway. They want to know how it works so they can defend against it." She was right. Of course she was right. This was an intelligence grab. A final humiliation. But then another thought, even darker, wormed its way into my mind. What if it wasn't? What if they genuinely wanted the schematics? Not to defend against it, but to use it? Our kinetic weaponry was simple, brutal, and efficient. Maybe it was a tool they hadn't considered, a form of power their elegant minds had overlooked. What if we were about to hand our greatest weapon to the very enemy that wanted to enslave us? The needle-like ship was getting closer to Cerberus. On the tactical plot, its course was a straight, unwavering line. It was a countdown timer made of metal. "Ghost Actual," the voice from Cerberus was sharp with panic. We have a hostile on approach. They are powering some kind of energy weapon. Do we fire? Sir, we have to fire now. I looked at the warship still blocking the shot. I looked at the scout, which had stopped its attack and was now just watching, a vulture waiting for the kill. I looked at the message from command, a desperate plea from leaders who had already lost control. Every option was a path to destruction. Fire and we die, proving our weapon is useless. Don't fire and we die as cowards. Give them the schematics and we die as traitors to the entire human race. But there was a fourth option. A stupid, desperate, completely human option. One born not of strategy but of pure, unadulterated spite. I opened a new channel, a wideband broadcast aimed directly at the Cthar warship. I leaned into the microphone, my heart hammering against my ribs. You want our curiosity? I said, my voice low but clear. You want to see how it works? Fine. We'll give you a live demonstration. I could feel the eyes of my entire bridge crew on me, wide with disbelief. I switched back to the Cerberus channel. Cerberus. Change of target. Sir? The warship is blocking the scout, we can't get a clear. Not the scout, I interrupted, my fingers flying across my console, inputting new coordinates. I was calculating a trajectory I'd run 1,000 times in simulations, a nightmare scenario we never thought we'd use. I sent the data packet. Target the moon. Deimos. Aim for the coordinates I'm sending you. Full power. Fire on my mark. A dead silence fell over the bridge. They all understood. Deimos, the smaller moon of Mars, was a barren rock. But my targeting solution wasn't aiming at the moon itself. It was aiming at a point in space just beyond it, a point that would use the moon's own gravity to slingshot the projectile, bending its path on a new, unpredictable course. It was a trick shot. 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance. We wouldn't be firing at the Cthar. We'd be firing past them. We were going to show them exactly what kinetic weaponry could do, but we were going to do it by throwing a moon-sized punch right over their shoulder, towards a target they would never expect. It was a message, a warning, and maybe, just maybe, a distraction big enough to make them flinch. The voice from Cerberus came back, filled with a mixture of terror and awe. Coordinates locked. The shot is unconventional, but solution is green. The Cthar needle ship was almost in firing range of the station. The warship waited, a silent, monstrous judge. I took a final breath. Mark. The word mark left my lips, and for a moment nothing happened. The universe held its breath. Then a faint, almost ghostly tremor registered on our long-range sensors. From the dark, pockmarked surface of the asteroid that housed Cerberus Station, there was no brilliant flash, no roar of engines. Just a silent, invisible release of unimaginable force. The tungsten slug, a projectile the size of a freight train, was gone. Hurled into the void at a speed that defied reason. On the bridge we watched the tactical plot, our own hearts seeming to stop. The Cthar warship didn't move. It just waited, a predator confident that the attack was meant for it. The slug crossed the millions of kilometers in a handful of heartbeats. It didn't head for the warship. It didn't head for the scout. It shot straight towards the small, lumpy moon of Deimos. For a terrifying second I thought I'd miscalculated, that we were about to obliterate a moon for no reason. But then at the last possible moment it didn't hit. It skimmed the surface so close it carved a new canyon into the ancient rock. And in that moment the moon's gravity, tiny as it was, did its work. It was like a master billiards player using the cushion. The slug's path bent, slingshotting around Deimos and rocketing off on a new, terrifying trajectory. It was now heading directly for the heart of the asteroid belt. The Cthar warship for the first time reacted. It shifted slightly, its sensors undoubtedly tracking the projectile's new path. There was a flicker of confusion in its stance. They had expected a direct attack. This was illogical. Then it happened. The slug, now moving with even greater velocity, struck a target. But not a ship. It struck a large nickel-iron asteroid, one of millions. The impact was not an explosion. It was a transformation. The asteroid didn't shatter into pieces. It vaporized, turning into a cloud of superheated, molten debris. But the slug didn't stop. It carried on, a demon of momentum, striking a second asteroid, then a third. It was the domino effect from hell. In less than a second, our single shot had turned a quiet sector of the asteroid belt into a chaotic storm of high-speed shrapnel. A shotgun blast on a cosmic scale. The cloud of debris, billions of fragments each carrying a piece of the original slug's devastating kinetic energy, bloomed outwards. And its path? It was on a perfect collision course with the Cthar scout. The scout saw it coming. It tried to maneuver, to flee. but there was no fleeing a storm. The cloud enveloped it. We heard nothing, but on our sensors, its signature flickered and died as 1,000 tiny projectiles shredded it from existence. It wasn't a clean deletion like their weapons caused. It was a brutal, messy, visceral death. Silence. The needle ship that had been approaching Cerberus halted its advance. The massive warship hung in the void, utterly still. We had not fired at them. We had not challenged them directly. We had changed the environment. We had used the solar system itself as our weapon. The comms crackled. It was the guttural voice from the warship, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating tone. A demonstration. You did not target us. No, I transmitted back, my voice steady now. We targeted your assumptions. You believe power is something you hold. For us, power is a force you apply. We don't need fancy shields. We have physics, and physics always wins. There was a long pause. We had shown them that our kinetic weaponry wasn't just a gun. It was a key that could unlock destruction on a scale they hadn't imagined. To destroy our planet, they would have to enter a solar system we could turn into a shooting gallery. The hubris of believing they were safe behind their shields was shattered. A new message appeared on my screen, this time from the warship itself. A data packet. I opened it cautiously. It wasn't a weapon schematic. It was a star chart. A single system was highlighted, the Cthar home system. Then a second message, text only. Asterisk, the hegemony acknowledges a compelling argument. Your system is under quarantine. No ship will enter. None will leave. You have bought your world a silence. For now, asterisk. And then without another word, the great warship turned. Its engines flared and it began to move away, retreating towards the jump point. The needle ship followed. They were leaving. A cheer erupted on the bridge, a raw, emotional wave of relief and triumph. My second grabbed my arm, her face streaked with tears. We did it. We actually did it. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a lifetime. We had won. We had saved Earth. We had used our brains and our stubbornness to stare down a monster. But as the cheering began to die down, I kept looking at the star chart they had sent. The quarantine. It wasn't a peace treaty. It was a stalemate. They weren't admitting defeat. They were regrouping. We had shown them a new kind of weapon, and a species that advanced wouldn't just fear it. They would study it. They would replicate it. We hadn't ended the war. We had just changed the rules. And then the final twist came. A quiet, internal alert flashed on my personal command screen. It was from the Deep Space Monitoring Array, the one that watched the void beyond the edge of our solar system. The system the Cthar had just left. The alert wasn't about the retreating warship. It was about the jump point itself. The sensors had detected a massive, transient energy signature just after the warship vanished. Far larger than anything the Cthar ship could have generated. It was a burst transmission. Directed not at us but outwards towards the depths of the galaxy from which the Armada had first come. A final message sent the instant before they jumped. We couldn't decode it. The encryption was beyond anything we'd ever seen. But the sheer power of the broadcast was a message in itself. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a report. And the last 3 seconds of the transmission, before it vanished entirely, contained a repeating data string that our computers could partially translate. A string that identified the subject of the report. The identifier wasn't for Earth. It wasn't for humanity. It was for the weapon. They hadn't been reporting on the defeat of a pesky species. They were cataloging a fascinating new discovery. They were telling someone, something else, that they had found a promising new form of kinetic weaponry. We hadn't won our freedom. We had put a price on our heads. And the auction had just begun. The cheering on the bridge died a slow, painful death. It didn't stop so much as it choked, suffocated by the cold, hard truth on my screen. The others saw the look on my face. The victory smiles faded, replaced by a familiar dread. It was a feeling we were getting used to. They're gone, my second said, her voice hopeful, trying to grasp onto the win. We did it. I didn't answer. I just turned my screen so she could see it. The data about the massive transmission, the unbreakable encryption, and that final chilling identifier. Her eyes scanned the lines and I watched the hope drain from her face, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. They weren't talking about us, she whispered. No, I said, my voice rough. They were talking about the gun. The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before. We had stared into the abyss, fired our best shot, and the abyss had taken notes. The quarantine wasn't a cage they were putting us in. It was a specimen jar. They were containing us until they decided what to do with the interesting new weapon they'd found. The comms linked to Central Command buzzed back to life. The blackout finally lifted. The voice on the other end was triumphant, ecstatic. Ghost of Kepler report. Sensors confirm the hostile vessels have retreated. This is a historic day. You are to be commended for your creative solution. I looked around the bridge at my crew. They looked back at me, their faces etched with the same grim understanding. They heard the empty celebration in Command's voice. They knew. Command, I said, cutting through the celebration. The retreat is not what it seems. We have intercepted a post-disengagement transmission from the Cthar warship. They have quarantined the system, and they have reported the existence of our kinetic weaponry to a higher authority. There was a long pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning, the politicians and generals trying to twist this new, ugly fact into something they could spin. Understood, Ghost? The voice came back noticeably cooler. The data will be analyzed. For now, stand down. Return to station keeping protocols. And, well done. The link went dead. Well done. The words felt like an insult. We didn't stand down. We couldn't. The battle was over, but the war had just changed. We spent the next hours tracking the debris field, monitoring the silent jump point, and trying again and again to crack that transmission. It was useless. It was like an ant trying to understand a symphony. Days turned into weeks. We were hailed as heroes. The crew of the Ghost of Kepler, the saviors of Earth. They gave us medals we didn't want and paraded our images across the net. They called our shot around Deimos, the bank shot heard round the galaxy. They didn't understand. They saw a trick. They didn't see the warning. The real work happened in the shadows. My second and I, along with the few crews we trusted from Cerberus and other black site stations, started talking. We used encrypted channels, buried in the noise of legitimate traffic. We called ourselves the Silent Chapter. Our purpose was simple, to make sure humanity never again fell for the folly of its own silence, or its own hubris. Because that was the real enemy now. Not the Cthar. It was us. It was the part of us that wanted to believe the fight was over. The part that saw the quarantine as safety instead of a timer counting down. Central Command was already talking about diplomatic overtures, and leveraging our strategic advantage. They were playing politics with an extinction-level threat. A month after the battle, I was summoned to Earth. Not to a military base, but to a quiet, wooded office far from any city. The man who met me wasn't a general. He was a historian. His office was filled with books, real paper books about fallen empires. You understand the cycle, he said without preamble. He had sharp eyes that missed nothing. You see the pattern. I see that we're repeating it, I replied. We shock them so we think we're safe. That's the same arrogance the Galactic Accord had. Hubris, the historian said, nodding. The belief that your current power is permanent. The Accord's hubris was in their technology. Our hubris is in our cleverness. We think because we won one round with a clever trick, we're smarter than them. He leaned forward. But they learned, didn't they? They learned from us. Instantly. He showed me analyses of the debris field. The Cthar scout hadn't just been destroyed, it had been scanned by the warship in its final moments. They had gathered data on the effects of our weapon. They were already learning. The quarantine won't last, I said. No, he agreed. It will last only as long as it takes for them to decide if they should destroy us to take the weapon, or if they can take the weapon without destroying us. Our only chance is to make that calculation impossible. How? By proving that the weapon is not a thing you can steal, he said, his voice low and intense. It's an idea. And ideas are contagious. You can't put a quarantine on a thought. That meeting changed everything. The Silent Chapter had a new mission. Not to build bigger railguns, but to spread the knowledge. We started leaking the core principles of kinetic weaponry, not the schematics for Cerberus but the basic, brutal physics of it, into every corner of human space. We gave it to universities, to engineering firms, to amateur rocket clubs. We made it open source. We turned humanity itself into the weapon. We made sure that if the Cthar, or whoever they reported to, ever came back, they wouldn't find a single secret to steal. They would find a species that had fully embraced its own nature. A species that had learned its lesson. A year later, I was back on the Ghost of Kepler, orbiting quietly at the edge of the solar system. The view was the same, but I was different. We all were. The hubris was gone, burned away in the fire of reality. We were quiet now, but it wasn't the silence of fear or obedience. It was the silence of a sentry who knows the night is full of dangers, and is content to wait and watch. My second, now my co-commander, stood beside me as we looked at the stars. Do you think they're out there? Listening? learning from what we're doing. I hope so, I said. I hope they see that we're not hiding anymore. We're not just waiting for them to decide our fate. And if they come back? Then they'll find that humanity's greatest strength was never a single weapon, I said. It was our ability to learn. We learned the cost of silence. We learned the poison of hubris. We learned that a warning is only a warning if someone is willing to listen. I pointed towards the dark where the jump point lay. And if they come back, they'll learn the final lesson. That we are no longer the species that warned them about the railgun. We are the species that is waiting to see if they were smart enough to listen. We stood there in the quiet, the endless stars stretching out before us. They were no longer just beautiful. They were a challenge. A question. And for the first time I felt like we were finally ready to answer. Not with a shout, but with a steady, unbreakable silence that spoke louder than any weapon ever could. The folly was over. The watch had begun. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed The Folly of Silence, liking the video and subscribing helps this channel grow. Until next time.